Hello, I'm Dave Feinlieb, and this is Beyond the Shelf. This show is an open exploration of the people and process behind e-commerce. Through conversations with innovators in the space, we learn the stories of these leaders and their strategies for e-commerce success. You can find out more about how we're helping leading brands and retailers build product detail page, retail media, and sales enablement content more than 80% faster than their category competitors at itsrapid.ai. My guest on today's show is Paul Forno from Deloitte Digital. Paul is a managing director at Deloitte Digital, where he is part of the overall commerce leadership team that is responsible for leading large digital transformations, delivering large commerce and content implementations, and heading up marketing for the commerce practice. Prior to Deloitte Digital, Paul was senior vice president at Razorfish, global consulting practice lead at NCR Corporation, and director of the e-commerce practice at Sapient Nitro. Paul started out his career as a software developer. We discussed Paul's perspective on e-commerce and retail media, the challenges and opportunities of large-scale digital transformations, and his predictions for the next 12 months and beyond. Please enjoy my conversation with Paul Forno. Paul, welcome to the show.
Great, thanks. Awesome to be here.
Exciting to be chatting with you. Would you take us back? How did you get your start in the space?
I guess I'll go back to kind of where I started and kind of that really, I've been lucky enough. I started career. I'm originally from Canada, went to the University of Waterloo and took their computer science program and was in co-op and was involved in some of the first websites out there in the mid 90s. Literally, I remember in college when the first browser came out, I saw it within, the Illinois Mark Andreessen browser that first came out in like 93, 4. I was within a week or two of seeing it. And so I got really lucky to ride the internet wave and been a part of, really starting out with a lot of the first websites and on the corporate. And I didn't have to go to the mainframe world, which was the cool thing. So, if you think back in those days, kind of the buzz around AI, that .com and web was the first big wave.
You got the start. You got to see some of the various early browsers and web pages. Really cool. And then you went into e-commerce. Tell us about how did you make the leap? What brought you there? What was interesting?
As a consultant, I was able to get a bunch of experience in really some of the first big corporate websites. Like, for example, worked with BMW Group and BMW Financial Services, rolling out some of their first web apps going out and, helping them with credit applications and some of the first applications online and web. And that really kind of got you into the place of how to build enterprise class applications that were changing how people were doing business. And, back in those early days, some of the challenges they had was just things that you wouldn't even think of now, right? Like for BMW, we had to help each of the dealers actually get ISDN lines, special high-speed connectivity, just to be able to get a rich experience. There wasn't this, the web, it was all dial-up. And so literally we had servers in the closet and we were building some of the first different websites and the interactions and some of the standards. And so really, really got into it at some of the first big enterprise websites that started touching into some of the e-commerce area, but then quickly jumped into, much bigger, specifically specialized into e-com.
You also, as part of that, helped some pretty large retailers undertake some sizable transformations and underlying platform transitions. Will you talk about what's involved in those kinds of projects?
Yeah, like some of the early days of some of the big e-commerce sites. And if you can imagine, it's been kind of up and down. One of the clients that I worked with was Borders bookstores. And ironically, for a long time, they were the Amazon of their day, right? And when Amazon came up with their commerce, Borders tried to come out and compete with them very early on. They couldn't compete. And so what they did, they actually ran their e-com site via Amazon. So at the height of the .com, they switched all of their websites incredibly to their biggest competitor. And they were much bigger at the time, thinking they made a lot of money, but then they realized, oh crap, these guys are going to pass us. And so we helped move them off of Amazon. And so that then led to, I helped them, even at the time, it helped them move off of their e-commerce on Amazon onto their own enterprise platform. Interestingly, that helped segue into one of the largest e-com transformations that I was part of, which I helped Target, which at the time in 2010 was completely hosted on Amazon. Their call center, their order management, everything was on Amazon, if you can believe it, in those days. And so, part of my role at Sapient, we helped to move them off of that platform and move into, a big, large transformation. And so really got to understand, and as part of like many of the tools didn't exist or very early on, and how to really jigger them up at that time. Because if you go back to those, 2009, still the proliferation of e-com and the whole retail space was still small single digits, but everybody knew it was the future. And so we were part of really laying the groundwork for many of these large transformations coming down the road.
It seems to me there's some technical learnings there, but there's also some strategic learnings. What are some of your insights or rules of the road, perhaps, for leaders and management teams as they're thinking about platform choice and strategic partners and these different waves?
One of the most interesting things that we saw, especially early on in the early days in the B2C and in the retail space, is many of these large companies treated their e-com business literally like a store. And they would call it store number 999, right? Or some, pick a number. And they would just treat it off to the side. And they would actually, if somebody tried to return something into a normal store, they would say, no, you got to mail it back. And because the biggest lesson learned and kind of thing that you have to start with is, as you think about commerce, you need to make sure everybody's co-aligned and incentives are aligned. Because what we found out was, well, the store people don't want to take up time because they're not getting paid on commerce or return. That's a separate business. So they didn't care. And magically, incentives drives behaviors. And so if you don't have from top down incentives driven, aligned, then you're not going to get this. How do you continue to grow and have this experience across all your different channels? So the biggest thing I would say, completely non-technical, is one, make sure there is alignment on incentives onto the outcomes and to help really drive commerce adoption.
We hear this about incentives and aligning and that really driving the right outcomes. And yet it's sometimes so hard to do, seemingly. What is it that the leaders that you work with do differently that they're able to get those incentives right and get them in place, even when maybe the org isn't set up for it?
I think the number one thing is make sure, like this especially what we see at Deloitte, is like it would be easy just to sell something or involve just from a technical perspective, deal with the IT group, the technology group, but really having the core business and insisting on getting the business involved. And so some of it is sometimes uncomfortable because they may or may not, like, that's not on their initial incentives, but like as much as you can kind of bring them along and also tell the story and also show the potential outcomes. And the other tactic is really also that was helpful tactically, is to bring some of the non-standard business owners into roles where they could present or talk about these changes so that they were looked upon as leaders. And so if they were part of the journey, they would much more, even if you didn't have all the incentives perfectly lined up, the more that you can make them personally success and look innovative, that really made the difference.
Speaking of Deloitte Digital, you're a managing director there now in your role. You've had so many great experiences, but tell us about your current role and about Deloitte Digital and what you're up to.
Sure. So Deloitte Digital is the largest commerce agency in the world. And so we do everything from strategy, design, build, operate, and I mean all of those things from a business level, from a technology level. We partner with all the major enterprise platforms from Salesforce, SAP, Adobe, Commerce Tools, much of the mock technology alliance groups, all of the major players and many of the ecosystem players around search, PIM, etc. So we'll work through all of these. And also the thing that we're seeing lots of growth is how are you tying into data and CDP and tying in these latest AI. And, I like to talk about not start, banging the drum on Gen AI this, but really that's really more opportunistic. Like, how do we make that within what's important for different clients? Like, how do you make that levers really drive that difference versus it's a magic button, right? Because we've been here long enough that there's always something new coming along, and it's supposed to solve everything. But the reality, especially if you have not worked in large companies, it's always more complicated. It's not just about the solution. It's how do you get the business units lined up? How do you get the product groups aligned? That's all the really hard stuff to really move large corporations, that it's not just about the technology side. And that's really where we excel, that we take that technology, the change management, and we bring in industry experts, be it retail, in B2B areas, in chemicals, manufacturing. We bring all of those guys together because that you really want to speak also in the industry that you're targeting.
It's a great set of insights. What does a day in the life look like for you? Customers, partners, taking the dog out for a walk, seeing the kids. How does it all come together for you?
Lots of fun. Especially, it's interesting because I used to travel way more than I did, over 100,000 miles. Post COVID, that changed a lot. And so I tend to have a lot of multiple Zooms at the same time, like I'm sure many of us, multiple calls on the go. But really helping to, I balance my time like every partner at Deloitte. We both deliver and sell. And so I'm jumping between clients. Also, I lead up our commerce marketing. So I'm out there speaking about the importance, because there's still a huge growth area, especially in B2B commerce and getting the word out. And so I spend a lot of time really trying to get the word out because there's so much opportunity out there.
Now, I want to drill in there on B2B commerce. First, just give us the basics. What is it? Define it, if you would. And why are you so excited about it?
So B2B commerce, again, it's a term that gets a little confusing. And, people might think, oh, it's like Amazon. It's that thing over there onto one channel for large companies. But what I like to do is step back a bit. And when we talk about it is, first of all, think about B2B. You're selling from one business to another. It's not necessarily about you personally. It might be a complex sell. So you might have to interact with 10 different types of personas: the procurement person, the sales manager, the field sales. Like, there's a lot of different roles that you need to bring along and get alignment on, and to in order to sell some of your products. And so when you're looking at it, it's not as simple as, hey, I have a great experience, I'm going to drive that person to click and they'll instantly buy it. Like, it's much more complex. And so when I go through and talk about B2B commerce, in fact, we now start to talk about it as B2B omni-channel commerce to force the discussion of, hey, B2B commerce is not just, one channel. There's a lot of varieties and sometimes used interchangeably. And this is very similar to what we went through when in the early days of B2C, right? Like, how do you sell online? Well, they weren't always aligned with the rest of the retail stores, et cetera. And so forcing that conversation and how they work together. So B2B, when we talk about B2B, it's the direct commerce, there's marketplaces, your marketplace, third-party marketplaces. There's the connection to procurement commerce, which means connecting to the Aribas and Coupas of the world, punch out related to that. There's CPQ, order, lead to order, all of these things, dealer portals, and then just the enabling your call center to order on behalf, chat ordering. Like, there's so many different varieties of B2B commerce. So we really think of it as all things digital selling from one business to another.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, you had this amazing quote in an interview I was listening to that you did with Ohio X, talking about retail's here to stay. E-commerce isn't the only thing. Would you give us the context and the perspective on how you were thinking about that?
I've been the e-commerce guy for a long time, and I feel like I'm one of the old guys in the e-com industry. And at the height, we did this video with one of the things I'm super proud of. I'm based in Columbus, Ohio, and there's a huge tech scene. We call it the Ohio Heartland, and part of Ohio X group. And they did a recording. We did an interview in the midst of COVID when literally it was peak, B2C, the growth, that big spike. And so you saw the massive investment in DTC players, retail players. Like, everybody thought, the DTC and e-commerce was taking over the world. And so that's what we kept hearing, like, oh my God, it's everything. It's going to take over. And I'm like, wait a minute. I'm the e-com hype guy and you've gone too far, right? Like, yes, it's going to continue growing, but it's not everything, right? Like, each type of industry will have their mix. There'll be some growth, but e-com will never overtake retail, which has been around for thousands of years of buying, right? It's never going to overtake that and be everything, but it's going to continue the influence and growth in that. And so there was a lot of like hyperbolic takes at the time. And I was just trying to get like, let's be, step back. And in fact, what we've seen, the reality of the numbers is, yes, of course we can't grow at that pace anymore. A lot of these players have like disappeared or gone away but some of the large continued companies that have, we've seen the growth's actually at a higher pace than it was before, but it wasn't at the hyperbolic pace that it was at the peak of COVID.
So I need to call you on the next set of predictions so I know what we're all getting too excited about, and how to moderate while still keeping the enthusiasm. Another aspect of that space and this kind of resurgence in Omni this year, if you will, is a renewed focus on supply chain. It was a big challenge for folks during the pandemic, and something I know you're passionate about. Will you tell us kind of how does supply chain fit in and connect the dots with what we're seeing with retail media and demand and all the different channels that the brands are selling on now?
I want to start off because sometimes and I know a lot of the commerce and the retail guys that are talking about this, they might get into debates. Well, it's not omni-channel, it's unified commerce. Like, I mean the same thing, right? Like, whatever you want to call it, the way to have a holistic view of retail is the term I'm trying to get to. But in this instance, I'll say omni-channel. Okay. So what we're seeing now is, kind of tied to what I was talking before, the growth in retail has way slowed down and come back to more reality post the COVID time. And that's where we're seeing inflation over last year really affected things. So between inflation, the deceleration of growth really put B2C companies at, okay, wow, we do have to focus on profitability. And if we have to focus on profitability, they really have to look at their whole supply chain and how do they optimize that. So there's a number of interesting things that they're looking at to really drive that profitability. One, back to more just from a business centric, like how, from the supply chain perspective, how are we optimizing? How are we fulfilling? How do we make it easier? And if you look at some of the challenges that we're having right now in the Middle East and some of the shipping, right? Like if you're ordering stuff, assuming it's coming and you're pricing it in a certain way and it's not going to get there and it'll be, so really being able to be reactive to global events and how do you react to that from a pricing perspective and how do you plan? Because, you know, especially throughout the year, retail is very cyclical. And if you can't meet that hump, either for if you're big into, you know, back to school shopping and you haven't planned for it and you can't get it there and you miss the window, well, you might lose that opportunity. So lots of ways to optimize there based on all the things that are going in the supply chain. And also other interesting areas of just how to minimize returns, how to look at different ways to ensure you get what you want up front in, be it reviews, be it in more views, more looking at it, virtual try-ons, all of those things. I kind of, in the B2C world, I think we're into this now, this phase of e-commerce is how do we drive, for some companies, we have the biggest players that they want more eyes because they're actually making more money on retail media. And the next segment might, no, they have to figure out how to be profitable on their products and they're trying to optimize. So it's a really interesting, depending on the segment, what they're trying to, you know, optimize for.
Is there an example that comes to mind from some of your recent partner or customer interactions where you think to yourself, wow, this team or this brand or company is really doing something right, doing something innovative when it comes to connecting the dots and thinking about the different segments?
I think it's amazing some of the larger players of how they're finally starting to take advantage of their footprints, right? Where 10, 12 years ago, when we started these discussions, you know, the retail people in the stores were king and they had nothing to do with it. And we've almost gone to the other extreme where some department stores are now returns for other companies to drive foot traffic, right? And so I think some of these bigger players, if you look back at 2023, some of the largest players actually grew multiples of growth on the average of the overall e-commerce space. And they really finally clicked in to take advantage of their footprint, their geography, and to connect those dots. And in fact, what that made it, because they focused on how do I make it easy to buy? How do I get it to them? How do I take advantage of hey, I only have a store a couple miles away, and taking advantage of all those different things and using the data to connect. I really think 2023, and we've just gotten a lot of the numbers, was really the growth of the biggest players, and two, the proliferation of money from China buying these new, you know, Chinese startup brands that are really, you know, trying to expand into the US. That really was the B2C story for last year.
That is a perfect segue to my last two questions for you. One on AI, one on predictions. So first, no conversation these days is complete without a question at least about AI. Where are you seeing that? Where are we in kind of adoption? You do work with a lot of these large organizations. How are you seeing them adopt dip their toe in the water and hopefully, potentially roll out some AI capabilities in production.
Yeah, it's something that different formulations of this has been going on for a long time, right? So if you think about personalization or referral of products, recommendations of products, search, all of that, that's a form of AI. And what we're seeing is, especially like on search products, they're continually to get better and better, these enterprise search products to drive. And so from a retail perspective, that's actually the most impactful that I've seen that's leveraging AI is around search and tuning those models. That's the very practical hit the street in the enterprise, right? The other parts are, again, going back to if you think about this whole idea of how do you get to be more profitable? And one of the things is this product right with me? Well, back in the early days of, hey, I got one picture, two pictures up. Well, if you can use some of these Gen AI image tools to come up with lots of variations in your context and colors, or that can help really get that connection with people. So that's a very practical instance that I've seen people start to use in different ways, depending on the segments, right? Of how to take advantage of them. Like, you can imagine from a product perspective, like lots of different variations and make it look like my instance, but much more interestingly and more hospitality related, like, hey, I'm going to have a party and I want to invite this many people and I want a Mexican theme. And can you tell me what I should order? Right. And give me recipes for it. Right. And having that conversational discussion, those, again, very practically easy thing to add on. So these are all the things, very quick turns. I think the long term opportunity is going back to what we talked about before, is full end to end, this whole, how do we optimize? We've been involved with some clients that, just like you see at from pricing from airplanes, like how dynamic that pricing is. Well, we're starting to see some retailers and commerce players like think more dynamically, like, how do we take advantage? How do we optimize it? If I know I'm not going to get the products, then I don't have to put the discounts on, right? If I know this is going to go and we need to get this out and there's a cost, let's get the discounts on. And so those are very things that are out there already, but the long tail is the whole optimization of the whole supply chain. And how do you optimize all that to really get to market? So things such as, what should we be doing? Like, what new products should we be thinking about? And how do we maybe take all the insights and summarize from TikTok that are related to a certain topic and online stories and pull that all together and tell me, what are some potential products based on the latest trends? That's where it's going to get into, the demand planning and how that all fits together will be super interesting.
Building on that, predictions for the next 12 months?
I think there's going to continue, as I mentioned before, many of these DTC players that were basically arbitrage, like a brand that bought from China, stuck their logo on, and then sold. That's going away. And what you're seeing is this massive investment on these, direct from factory operators from China that are just blowing that business up because they've just cut out the middleman, which was some of these DTC players. And so I think they're going to continue to invest. What will be interesting is, obviously they're not profitable, but they're trying to buy eyeballs. And in many ways, this is something similar to what Amazon did in the early days, like to get enough scope to build that you can sell and down the road get profitable. It'll be interesting. So I see them continuing to grow and make an impact. I see, again, the largest enterprise retail players continuing their growth, and all of these things, including from a retail media perspective, the importance is going to continue to grow. And so that'll kind of bubble down to wherever it hasn't yet, it's going to reach it there. And then lastly, on AI will find there is no one magic button, but it'll continue to knock off interesting problems will be solved, and those will get adopted, bit by bit. It's not going to be one magic button. It's going to be little problems will get solved here and there.
Paul, I've enjoyed our conversation so much. If you're up for it, I've got 3 quick questions for you before we wrap up. The first one is, what 2 people have inspired you the most in your professional life?
I think I'd start, I mentioned before I went to the University of Waterloo. One of my professors there, and I was taking computer science and math and more techie, but he taught econ. I took econ 101 with him and econ 102, and I also ended up taking an entrepreneurship class with him. But he was the most amazing. Like, imagine a econ 101 class at the end of the year, the class stood up and gave him a standing ovation. I'm not even making that up. That really happened all the time because he was so engaging and told stories and what was so important. And so I got that passion for commerce and business and like what to do next, because his name's Larry Walker, and he was just amazing professor.
Great source of inspiration, and I think we all strive to be that inspiring. So something to aspire to. Yeah. Outside of work and family, when you do get some downtime, how do you like to spend it? What are some of your favorite hobbies?
Well, by far the favorite I love to do, and just came back from vacation. We love to travel, so I think I've been to close to 40 countries around the world. But we like to travel kind of authentically and learn. So I just came back from Oaxaca in Mexico on a food tour, and we got to got to go to all these little markets, go shopping with a chef, go back to his restaurant, learn how to make the foods from the ground up that's local to the area. It was just amazing. Like, really, I really am a big believer in travel, because the more people that you can get to know and understand, I think it's just better for acceptance of everyone, because it's easy to, necessarily maybe not like somebody who's on the other side of the world. But if you've been there and understand it, you're like, oh, they're just like us. Right. And so I'm a big believer in that.
Great food and great connections. Yes. I love it. Paul, if people want to get in touch with you, find you on the web, what's the best way for them to find you?
I'm on LinkedIn, and I also been sharing on Twitter /X, whatever you want to call it. I like to share all things e-commerce all the time, and so feel free to find me on Forno P on Twitter there as well.
Perfect. We'll add that to the show notes. It's been such a pleasure talking with you today. I learned a lot and had a great time chatting with you. Paul, thanks a lot for taking the time.
Thanks a lot, Dave.
I hope you enjoyed today's show. Beyond the Shelf is brought to you by It's Rapid. It's Rapid is the platform Pepsi, Sierra Nevada, Revlon, and hundreds of other leading brands and retailers use to build personalized content at scale. Whether that's images, videos, or product descriptions for their product detail pages, shoppable videos or banners for their digital ad campaigns, or sell sheets for sales enablement, brands that use It's Rapid are able to produce high-quality, on-brand content on average more than 80% faster than category competitors. To find out more, please visit itsrapid.ai. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Beyond the Shelf.